Hey, YouTube! Instead of my usual goofy preamble, I'd like to thank Zach Laurent over at Evolutionary Arts for not only bringing TC-11 to my attention, but he also asked BitShape to give me a promo code, which they did, in fact, provide. And I'm really glad that he did bring this to my attention because it is amazing. This is way more than I was expecting out of this. It is probably the most advanced synthesis engine available on the iOS. You've probably seen videos online of people playing around with it just by running their fingers around it, and all these various and interesting things pop up on the screen. But these are not just for looks. This is telling you exactly what this patch is doing. So right now I've got these big concentric circles, and as you hear, I pull it out, bring it in, and in addition to that, you see I've got these four little circles inside that are telling me how many presses I've got going on. You can have up to 8 voices, so you can play all of your main fingers. And you also see that there is an indicator for where my press started. And all of that is feeding into the patch, which is this thing here. And it is pretty elaborate. You've got a whole bunch of different types of oscillator options, as well as noises, filtering options, as well as the amp, and the inclusion of an amp that is modulatable for some AM synthesis, which is quite interesting, as well as some effects and additional filters and a stereo delay and stuff. This video is actually being presented in mono because in previous videos that had a lot of crazy shit going on in the panning, people were reporting that it was making them feel sick. And I think it was the panning that was going on there. So I'm just doing this one straight in mono so that everybody can enjoy this. I haven't had any sort of problems actually playing with this, but I just wanted to let you know you're not hearing any of the stereo delay or anything like that. But anyhow, in here you get controls for all of these various oscillators and filters, and there are just a ton of different ways of interacting with everything. So here we've got a sequencer is playing with the multi-oscillator's frequency for pitch, and you just see here there's this selector that is saying send everything to this as a MIDI note. And you can also just do a constant, or if you want to get really fancy, there are a number of interesting controls for everything. You can assign all of this to pretty much everything in here. There's the obvious X and Y position, but also interesting things like the speed or the distance to the first touch, and distance to center, and all this other great stuff that makes playing this unlike anything else. And this might seem really, really complicated, but stick with me to the end. I'm going to show you a few tricks to make this a lot more manageable. I'm going to show you just how elaborate some of these things can get. There's the AM waveform and depth and panning and all this, as well as the effects. And the stuff you select in here is reflected in these side panels. So if I add in a white noise, that will now appear down here. In addition to all the various touch controls, you've also got an attack, hold, decay, sustain, release envelopes, and you can add a whole bunch of these, and the total of those is 4. And this can also be assigned with all the various touch controls. And all of these controls have been designed with the idea of being played polyphonically, so you can have these single touch triggers that will play around with things on a per voice level, so that one touch will be playing with its own ADSR or its own sequencer or whatever. And you've got LFOs, and down here at the bottom we got sequencers, which help to really manage what's going on in all of this, because you can actually play tunes. I'll give you a little example here. So the little tune you hear being played is coming from the sequencer being fed to the oscillator as MIDI note information. And then on top of that, I've got all the touch controls to have these ones that are registering the distance to the center to control the envelope amount for the filter. In addition to it paying attention to my distance from the center, it's also keeping track of how many notes that I'm pressing in order to allow more to come through in the filter. but it's also keeping track of the center of the group, which is this indicator right here. And as that moves up and down, it is playing with the tuning. And you might notice in the background there are these lines here, and this is a logarithmic scale that is, it looks like this would typically be the y-axis, but because of the way this is designed, this is actually the x-axis, because it doesn't matter how you've rotated the screen, it will position itself in the same exact spot. So in portrait mode, this would be x and this would be y. And in landscape mode, as I've got it right here, it's still X and Y, which can be a little confusing, but I found myself to be able to work around that. And all of this adds up to a really expressive and wild way of playing with music. And as you hear, I mean, it's keeping a beat. It's actually playing tunes rather than just being some glitches or whatever. I've been playing with this for about a week now, and I've found that it's a lot easier for me to play something that I design, because I know exactly what everything's doing, whereas if you're going through all of the various patches, it will tell you what everything is assigned to, so you can, pick out one of the defaults and look through it and say, okay, well, my Y is doing panning, and I've got sequencers doing this and the other thing. If you are a user that is more comfortable just playing with presets, I think you might be a little disappointed with this, because a lot of these are little mini tutorials on synthesis rather than anything you could actually play. Most of them just end up sounding like sound effects. I've selected some of my favorites here, though, so you can get a sampling of what this sounds like. You'll see on this one that I've got this little swirl in the center, which I can play around with like this. And that is controlling the mixing in of a downsampler. And this is also keeping track of the distance between notes. Makes for some really cool ethereal shit. I have lost hours just playing around with stuff like that. This one is a great example of how the sequencer can bring a lot of order to what would otherwise be just a complete and chaotic mess. This one makes use of a different controller that's based on the angle to the first press. So here is a press, and here's another press. I had a lot of fun with these by playing my fingers around like this, and then like this, so the first press will change as I move my fingers. And with that, all those angles are changing as well. And as you hear here, you get some really wicked sounds out of this thing. All all of this is really well thought out, especially the sequencer and the way that that can try to tame all of this. If I go into my patch here, into my sequencer, you see I've got all these various MIDI notes here. And if you're not familiar which MIDI note number is assigned to which key, it's pretty easy to get your head around it because everything is in semitones and you've got 12 in an octave. So you can usually work your way around like that. And to help you, there is also the key filtering, which will only play notes within a specified key here. So you see all the lit up notes are the only notes that will actually be played no matter what numbers are being sent to it. And if a number falls outside of that range, it'll try to round it down or up to the nearest key that it is filtering through. And in addition to that, you've got gates. And the sequencers themselves can also be controlled by all these crazy touch controls. So you could have the sequencer stepping through based on, how many group things you're doing or whatever. It's so modular that you can pretty much make the controller drive anything you want. But as I said, people that aren't really into synthesis and getting their hands dirty and all of this will probably find the $30 price to be a little crazy for what they get, because the presets are not going to keep you very entertained for very long. I do think that this is very worthwhile, though, for synthesis. I personally plan on spending the next couple of months exploring all the different ways that FM can be utilized with all these touch controls.